Well, I've always been excited about the beginning of a new year. For as long as I can remember, at least the last many years, I've been excited about thinking about a new year of possibility, a new year of opportunity, a new year of blessing. And I don't know what the opportunities will be. I don't know what the blessings will be. I don't know what the possibilities are that I'm talking about, but it just seems that every year is filled with all of that. And yet at the same time, I am well aware that 2022 will hold a great deal of difficulty. I know that because it happened in 2021, happened in 2020, 19, 18, 17. It's always happened. It's always been that way. That this year will be filled with sickness. There will be a lot of sickness in our own number in 2022. It'll be filled with death. No year passes as there's not death among us and around us. The year will be filled with economic problems. We already know that in our nation, they're talking about record high inflation for 2022. So gasoline prices will be higher and food costs will be higher and all that will affect us. And in addition to that, there'll be struggles with jobs and struggles with personal finances. And I know that there'll be struggles in relationships that we have this coming year. Struggles will come from a variety of places, and we'll feel the pain of it. And you're probably thinking, well, he's talking about 2022 in an optimistic way and all the possibilities and all the blessings, and yet he's talking about this suffering stuff, and it doesn't seem to fit. And yet that is reality. And in the midst of all that, I want to talk about this idea of rejoicing. In the midst of all that, I want 2022 to be a year of rejoicing. And so you can already tell that we're not going to go back to the book of Romans just yet. Perhaps, most likely, next Sunday. But I decided this morning that we would continue to do what we have been doing for the last 2 weeks. Kind of topical lessons out of the book of Philippians. And this morning it's in Philippians chapter 4. Again, I want to tell all of you, I am so thankful that so many of you are watching and listening, and I hope all this is a blessing to you that we do this morning. I suspect every one of you knows what Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4 says. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." And I'm going to say it again, rejoice. Paul is going to be emphatic. And he said, rejoice in the Lord. And I don't want that little phrase, in the Lord, to throw us off in our thinking, because he's just talking about those of you who are members of the kingdom. I want you to rejoice. And I want you to rejoice always. Now that's the part that bothers me. That's the part I'm trying to get my hands on this morning and my mind wrapped around this morning, because it's going to be easy for me this year. When opportunities come that I didn't expect and I'm excited about them, and when possibilities are seen in the near future, and when all the blessings come, it'll be really easy for me to rejoice. But when people get really sick, and when loved ones die, and when we have economic problems, and I didn't even mention that 2022 will be a major election year. It'll be a political year, and we're going to grow weary with all the political talk and all those things. And yet we're supposed to rejoice during those times. And the answer seems to be yes. We're supposed to be a rejoicing people even in those particular times. Now, doesn't that sound attractive to you? Isn't that something you really, really want for your life? I know you do. I do. All of us do. So Paul's going to spend the 4th chapter of the book of Philippians telling us how to do it. And he says a lot of things. I'm going to narrow it to one particular thought. I want to talk about one thing this morning. In verse 10 of chapter 4, Paul's going to say to these people, these Christians at Philippi, I rejoice. I personally rejoice that you have renewed your concern for me. I know you're always concerned, but now you've had an opportunity to show it. Now, we have no idea about what Paul is actually speaking. We just know he had a life of suffering. This past year in 2021, we spent a lot of time looking at the book of Acts. And so if you look at the book of Acts, the last part of the book of Acts, the last half, you're going to spend a lot of time looking at Paul's life. When he was immersed into the kingdom, he was told, you're going to suffer so many things because you're going to keep telling the story of Jesus. And indeed, he did suffer so much. Do you remember? Paul was ridiculed. He was chased from cities. There were times when he was imprisoned. He was beaten. Do you remember the time he was stoned? And do you remember the time he was shipwrecked? He had a life like that. So I don't know what he's talking about when he's talking to the church at Philippi. He's just saying, I'm really happy. I am rejoicing that you renewed your concern for me. But then he says something that's very revealing about his life and very revealing about how our lives should be this morning. Because he begins by talking about something that he's learned in his own life. These are familiar verses also, verses 11 and 12. I'm really happy that you have renewed your concern for me, but I want you to know I have learned to be content whatever the situation or the circumstance might be. He'll go ahead to say, as you read it on the screen, that I know what it is to have a life of plenty when everything's going well, and I know what it is to have a life that's very, very difficult, a life of suffering. But I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances are. I began to realize this week, it's been a long, long time since I have talked about this idea of being content. In fact, I began to think, what is the definition of content? And so I looked it up, not in a dictionary. I don't think any of us use a dictionary any longer. You might even have a dictionary at your house. But on my phone, I just looked it up, and I typed in the definition of the word content, and the very first phrase that came up was this phrase that you see, peacefully happy. Peacefully happy. And I thought, wow, that kind of seems to be what I'm looking for in life. And I think it's what everybody else is looking for in life, that I could be peacefully happy. And Paul says, what I have learned is to be peacefully happy no matter what the circumstance really is. That's what we all want, isn't it? To be peacefully happy. I got a text yesterday. I told a small group of people here in this congregation about some friends of ours, or friends of mine especially, in Lubbock. His name is Rick, and Rick was diagnosed recently with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, inoperable. And so Rick and Holly have been in Mexico for the last several weeks, and will be there for a couple of more weeks, where they're doing special kinds of treatments in regard to this particular cancer. So I text them about every week. Every few days I'll text to see how things are going and reminding them that people are praying for them. And yesterday, sometimes Rick will respond, sometimes Holly will respond. Yesterday, Holly responded with a very, very long text. And in that text, she quoted what she had read that morning. And it sounds like exactly what I'm trying to say this morning. She quoted something that says, we are learning to be, in my words, peacefully happy, knowing that God is in control of all this, and was talking about this thing of contentment, my words, in the midst of a very, very difficult time in their lives. How you you and I learn what Paul learned. And we ought to underline the word learned because it requires a learned process to be content, to be peacefully happy regardless of the circumstances. It doesn't come naturally. It's something that you don't understand naturally. You have to learn it. I also want to say this. This is particularly important for people in the kingdom of God. I don't believe you can learn this outside of the kingdom of God. You can try some things. You can try some self-help things, and I've tried all kinds of self-help things to be peacefully happy in all areas of my life. And they help a bit. They help a bit. For example, my favorite one, perhaps you heard me talk about it, came from a book written by a woman who is a social worker by training. She has her doctorate in social work, a researcher at the University of Houston. Her name is Brene Brown. And I need to qualify this, and maybe I shouldn't say this where everybody can listen all over the world, but I no longer read her material. I no longer listen to her speeches because she uses such filthy language, I just don't want to listen to it. But there is this one book, and there's this one thing that I found from that book. And she talks about how in America we are plagued by the principle of scarcity. Now, you have to understand the principle because if you just focus on the word scarcity, it doesn't make sense, at least in my lifetime. Now, my parents' lifetime, they knew scarcity. But in my lifetime, as Americans, we've never known scarcity. I know that right now there's some things that are scarce. We know that all the car lots are empty across our nation because they're waiting for some little tiny computer chip, and they are scarce. And I understand that there are certain things in the supply chain right now that are scarce, but hopefully that won't last very long. We have known a life of plenty. What she's talking about in the principle of scarcity is this. She said, we have grown up with an attitude that to be, in my words, peacefully happy, we have to have more. And we've developed this concept of life that it's never enough. What we have now is not enough. My clothes, it's not enough. My vehicle, it's not enough. My house, it's not enough. And some people will even look at their husband or their wife and say, he, she, not enough. And we're on this driving thing. The more we get, the more peacefully happy we'll be, and that is Satan's lie for all of us. So she says in her book that the antidote to that, the solution to that is to stop where you are and say, it is enough. It is enough. Where God has me at the moment, it is enough. Doesn't mean I can't work to make things different or make things better, but right now, it's enough. It's where God has me. I've been blessed. And when people talk about this passage that Paul is talking about, they always say, look at what Paul did personally. It was in that same city of Philippi that we read about last year in the book of Acts, where he was beaten when he should not have been beaten. He was falsely accused. He was wrongly imprisoned. And yet in the midst of all that, we find him peacefully happy. He's singing. And Paul's attitude seems to be, where I am is enough because it's where God has me for the moment. Now, I think that principle helps. But it is only, in my opinion, a self-help principle. And self-help principles will only take you so far in this life. It won't solve everything. They're little techniques that may take us a distance, may help us, but they'll never solve it all the way. And that's why I said that people outside the kingdom will never understand what we're talking about this morning. They'll never grasp this. They lose out on this giant benefit. So Paul tells us what really is required to learn how to be peacefully happy in every circumstance of life. It's in verse 13 of Philippians chapter 4. You don't even have to read it. Burke's going to put it on the screen for us, but you don't even have to look at the screen. You have this one memorized. If I would tell you, what are the top 5 verses in all the Bible? You would probably come up with this verse. It may be in your top 3, certainly in the New Testament. I have learned to be peacefully happy, content in every single circumstance, good and bad, every single circumstance, for I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Other verse is so popular that I've seen it on T-shirts. I've seen it on bumper stickers. I've heard it used in a variety of ways. And perhaps you can use the verse in a variety of ways. But you need to be careful not to take it out of context and make it mean something that it's not supposed to mean. You remember the principle I've taught you so many times or said so many times? Seldom does anything have meaning without context. You can take a sliver of what I say this morning and take it out of context, and you can make me into saying something that I never intended to say. It's one of the reasons I've never been too much of a fan of topical sermons, because you choose a verse here and you choose a verse there, and so easily you take them out of context and you can make it say whatever you want it to say if you're so inclined. But the context of this verse for sure is, I've learned how to be peacefully happy in every single circumstance because Christ gives me the strength to do so. So that's what I want you to think about for a moment. That's why it's so important to be immersed into the kingdom and to begin to build a wholehearted relationship with Jesus. You remember those verses where it says, from the mouth of Jesus even, that we need to hunger and thirst after righteousness? Hunger and thirst? Really, really want it? And we already know from the limited amount of time we've been in the book of Romans that righteousness, you can kind of write a little formula, righteousness equals Jesus. God gives us his righteousness through Jesus Christ. Hey, and you remember those verses like, seek first the kingdom? And you remember those verses, seek and you will find? You got to really want a relationship with Jesus Christ. You got to want him to be the Lord of your life. It's his kingdom. It's his kingdom. It's not my kingdom. I'm just a part of his kingdom. And so every day you seek and you build this relationship. I think that's what Holly Beatonbow was trying to tell me. That they're seeking this relationship. And they've become peacefully happy. Even in the midst of this great trial. By the way, we learned over the Christmas holidays of another friend of ours. He's from Midland, Texas, 64 years old. Great guy. His wife and Suze are particularly close. He's an elder in one of the congregations there. He went in for routine back surgery. And they found cancer in his spine, and the cancer is in his lungs, and the cancer is in his liver, and going through a major battle. But the last text that Sue's got from Steve's wife, Gina, seemed to say that they were peacefully happy and optimistic because of their confidence in Christ. Isn't that how you'd want to live? 2022, I'm excited. I really, truly am excited what God will do in his kingdom, what God will do through this little group right here at the Northside Church of Christ, what all the possibilities might be. But I know that right now upon us, there will be all these other things that tend to rob us of being content in this life. And yet here we are as Christians, so very blessed in that through Jesus Christ, we can be peacefully happy in every circumstance. But it depends upon our building this deep, deep commitment, relationship, obedient attitude toward the life of Jesus Christ.